There is a corridor in the west wing of the palace that no one uses after the lamps are lit. It runs behind the old nursery, past a row of tall windows that face the Queen's garden, and it ends at a door that has been locked for the better part of 9 years. The servants call it the quiet gallery, though there is nothing in it but portraits and the smell of beeswax and cold stone. I know that corridor better than I know my own hands. For a long time it was the only place in the whole of the house where I permitted myself to be a man instead of a post. I am telling you this because I want you to understand before anything else that I did not mean to be found. A guard of the Royal House of Harrowgate is not a man who is found. He is a man who is placed, and who stands where he is placed, and who is collected again when his hours are done. That is the whole of the craft if you strip away the medals and the polish and the plumed helm they hang on us for the state days. You learn to be furniture. You learn to be a wall that happens to breathe. 31 years I gave to that discipline, and I was good at it. Good enough that the young ones used to say old Wren could stand a full watch through a thunderstorm, and you'd swear he was carved from the same marble as the lintel. So when I tell you that on a gray evening in the 9th autumn, a small girl of 9 years found me in that corridor with tears on my face and my shoulders shaking like a boy's, you must know how far a man has to fall to arrive at such a thing. I had not wept in front of another soul since I was a child myself. I had trained it out of me the way you train a dog off a scent. And yet there I was, kneeling, a grown guardsman, a veteran of the house, kneeling on the cold floor of the quiet gallery with my helm off and my glove pressed to my mouth to keep the sound down, and the sound got out anyway. Her name is Maelin. She is the youngest of the king's grandchildren, the daughter of Princess Alara, and she was 9 years old that autumn, which is a thing that matters more than you can yet know. She had slipped her nurse, as she often did, and gone wandering in her nightdress and a pair of felt slippers with the toes worn thin, and she had followed the sound of a man crying the way a child follows any strange thing in a big dark house, not with fear, but with a terrible, disarming curiosity. I heard the slippers before I saw her, a small shuffling on the stone. I froze the way you freeze when you have been caught doing the one thing you swore you would never let them see, and I turned my head, and there she was at the mouth of the corridor with a candle lamp too big for her hands, her dark hair loose down her back, looking at me with those gray eyes that are not her mother's eyes at all. They are her grandmother's eyes, but I will come to that. "You're crying," she said. Not a question. Children do not soften a thing the way we do. She said it the way you would say the fire's gone out or it's raining, a fact laid on the floor between us. I got to my feet. 31 years of training took over where my heart had failed, and I stood, and I found the flat voice I use for everything, the voice that has no bottom to it. "Your Highness should be in bed," I said. "It is very late. I will call your nurse." "You were crying," she said again, and she came closer instead of going away, which is the opposite of what anyone else in that house would have done. The great ones do not look too long at a guardsman's face. It is not done. You are not supposed to have a face. But this small person walked right up to me across the cold floor and lifted her lamp and looked at me as though I were the most interesting thing in the palace, and she said, "Why?" I have been asked hard questions in my life. I have been asked them by kings and by officers of the watch, and once, a long time ago, by a dying woman whose hand I was holding. But I do not think any question has ever gone into me the way that one did. Why? From a child in worn slippers in a corridor that smelled of the dead, at the foot of a portrait she had never once been allowed to see. Because that is the thing I have not told you yet. Behind me in the dark at the end of that locked corridor hangs a portrait of a woman in a pale gray gown, a woman with her chin lifted and her hands folded and a small private smile at the corner of her mouth that the painter caught by accident and never could have caught on purpose. She wears a circlet of silver leaves. She is young in the painting, younger than I am now, younger than I was even then, and she has gray eyes. She was the late Queen Isolde, the first wife of King Alaric, the mother of Crown Prince Rowan and Princess Ilara. She has been dead for 9 years and some months, and in all that time her portraits have hung in shadow, and her name has been spoken in the house the way you speak of weather that has passed, and the youngest of her grandchildren had never, until that gray evening, stood in front of her face. I had been kneeling to that portrait. I had been kneeling to it, in fact, because of the date, and the child who found me weeping there did not know, could not have known, that the woman on the wall behind me was her own grandmother, or that I had once sworn an oath to that woman that I had spent 9 years failing to keep. Why? She asked a third time, because I had said nothing, and a child will always ask a third time. I looked down at her. And heaven forgive me, because a guard is never to speak of the house's private grief, and never to burden a child, and never, never to let a member of the family see him unmade. I opened my mouth to send her back to bed with the flat voice, the wall voice, the voice that has no bottom. And instead I heard myself say, very quietly, because I made a promise a long time ago, Your Highness, and tonight is the night I remember that I could not keep it. She sat down. She just sat, right there on the cold stone in her nightdress, and set her 2 big lamp on the floor beside her, and folded her small hands in her lap in a way that, heaven help me, was the very image of the woman on the wall, and she looked up at me and said, "Tell me." And that is where I must begin properly. Because to tell you what I confessed to a 9-year-old girl in a locked corridor, and what it did to the house when it came out, I have to take you back 30 years, to a spring when I was young and stupid and certain of everything, and to the day a princess of a foreign house came across the water to marry our king. I was 22 then, newly badged, so proud of my scarlet that I fairly creaked with it. They had assigned me to the household guard, the inner service, not the gate posts the tourists photograph, but the quiet duty inside the walls where the family actually lives. It is a strange promotion that. You go from being a statue in a square to being a shadow in a home. You see them at breakfast. You see the king with his boots off. You learn that the great and glittering people of the realm quarrel over the last of the honey and worry about their children's coughs like anyone else. It undoes you a little, that intimacy. It is meant to. A gate guard protects a symbol. A household guard protects people, and you cannot help but come to know the people. The princess who came across the water to marry King Alaric was named Isolde, and she was 19 years old, and she was frightened half to death. No one says that part. In the songs she is serene, in the portraits she is composed. But I stood in the receiving hall the day she arrived, at the 3rd pillar from the dais where a green guardsman is put so he can do no harm, and I watched a girl of 19 walk the length of that enormous cold room toward a king she had met exactly twice, in a gown so heavy with pearls that 2 women had to carry the train, and I saw her hands shaking. Everyone saw her chin, lifted and steady. I saw her hands, because a guard sees hands, hands are where the truth is. Her hands were shaking so hard that the pearls on her cuffs were trembling like water. And halfway down that hall she stumbled. It was nothing. A heel caught the edge of a flagstone, the smallest thing, but the whole court drew breath at once, that awful indrawn hiss of 100 people watching a young queen-to-be about to fall on her face in front of the realm. And I, green, stupid, 22, and standing at my post where I had no business moving. I took 1 step out from the 3rd pillar and put my gloved hand under her elbow. It was a flogging offense, near enough. A guard does not touch the family. A guard does not move from his post. A guard does not insert himself into a state occasion because a girl is frightened. I knew all of it and I did it anyway. 1 step and a steadying hand and she caught herself, and the moment passed, and no one but the 2 of us and perhaps the old captain by the door ever knew it had happened at all. But she knew. She turned her head just a fraction, and she looked at me, this frightened girl in her wall of pearls, and there was in her gray eyes a flash of pure, drowning gratitude, the look of a person who has been alone in a strange country and has just discovered, in the least likely quarter, that she is not entirely alone. And then she was gone, up the steps to the king, and I stepped back to my pillar and stood there with my heart going like a drum, and waited for the captain to come and take my badge. He did not take my badge. He came to me afterward in the corridor, and he looked at me for a long moment and he said, "You'll not do that again." "No, Captain." "But you did well," he said, and walked off, and that was the whole of it. Except it was not the whole of it, because from that day I was Isolde's man. Not officially, there is no such office, or there was not then, but she asked for me. Quietly, through the household, in the way that great people arrange the small mercies they are not supposed to want. When she walked in the garden, I was the guard on the path. When she sat with her ladies, I was the man at the door. When she could not sleep, and she often could not sleep in those first years, in that cold, enormous house so far from everything she had ever known, she would come out to the gallery in the small hours, and I would be there because I had learned her hours, and we would say nothing at all, and after a while she would go back to bed. Understand me. I want to be very careful here because there are ugly minds in every house, and there was nothing of that kind in it, and I would take my last breath swearing so. She was my queen. She became, over the years, something I do not have a good word for, a charge, a trust, the person I had been made for, in the way that a man is sometimes made, without ever choosing it, for the guarding of one particular soul. She was homesick and clever and kinder than anyone at that court deserved, and she was frightened for years, and never once let the frightened part show to a single person in the world except, sometimes, in the small hours, to the guardsman at the gallery door who saw her hands. She married the king. She grew into her circlet. She gave the realm a son, Rowan, and then a daughter, Elara, and the frightened girl became a queen the whole realm loved, and if you had watched her at the great occasions in those middle years, you would never have believed she had once shaken so hard the pearls trembled on her cuffs. She was magnificent. And through all of it I stood at the door, or on the path, or at the third pillar, and I aged from a green boy into a hard-faced man, and I asked for nothing, and I was given the one thing I would have asked for, which was to be near enough to keep her safe. And then she began to die, and I could not keep her safe from that. I will not dwell on the illness. It is not mine to lay out, and it does no one any good. It was slow, and it was cruel, and it took a year and some months, and toward the end they moved her to a set of rooms in the west wing where it was quiet and the light was good, and it was there, one autumn, that she called me in. It is not done, that either. A guardsman does not enter the private sick-room of a queen. But she called for me by name, Old Wren, and no one had the heart to refuse her anything by then, and so they let me in, and I stood at the foot of her bed in my scarlet with my helm under my arm, and I looked at what the illness had made of the girl who had crossed the water, and I am not ashamed to tell you that I had to lock my knees to keep standing. She was very weak, but her eyes were the same, gray and steady and full of that private amusement even then, even at the end. She looked at me for a long while, and then she said, "You've stood at my door for 30 years, Wren." "It has been my honor, your majesty," I said, and my voice did the thing it never does, which is crack in the middle, and she saw it, and she smiled. "I'm going to ask you for one more watch," she said. "The longest one. And you're going to say yes before I've told you what it is, because you've never once told me no, and I'm too tired to argue." "Yes, your majesty," I said. And she told me what the watch was. She had a third grandchild coming. Not born yet, Elara was expecting that autumn, and the child would come in the spring, months after the doctors had told the queen she would not see the winter through. A grandchild she would never hold, never name, never see grow. And this is the thing that I have carried for 9 years, the thing I knelt to that portrait to remember every autumn on the date she died, the thing I had never told a living soul until a small girl in worn slippers sat down on the cold stone and said, "Tell me." "I want you to watch over that one," the queen said. the one I won't meet. All the others will have memories of me, Rowan Will and Alara and their little ones that are already here. But the last one will have nothing. Not a face, not a voice, not a single afternoon. She'll grow up in this cold house being told her grandmother was a queen, and it will mean less to her than a story in a book, because you cannot love a person you never touched. Her hand moved on the coverlet, reaching, and I crossed the forbidden distance to the head of her bed and took it, and it weighed nothing at all. So you will watch over her, Wren. You will stand at her door the way you stood at mine, and you will not let her be alone in this house the way I was alone in it when I came. Promise me." "I promise," I said. "Say it properly." "I swear it on my badge and my name," I said, "and on every watch I have ever stood. I will guard the one you will not meet. I will not let her be alone." She closed her eyes then, satisfied, the way she used to close them in the gallery in the small hours when she had decided it was safe at last to sleep. And she said one more thing, so quietly I had to bend to hear it. She said, "There's a thing in the drawer for her, when she's old enough to understand. Not before. You'll know when." And I stood the last watch. I stood it for 3 days and 2 nights, refusing to be relieved, until the old captain, a different captain by then, a younger man than me who I had trained, came and stood beside me and said nothing and simply would not leave, so that I would not be standing it alone. And on the 3rd night the Queen Isolde died, with the good light of the west wing gone gray outside the window, and I stood at the foot of the bed in my scarlet and did not move and did not make a sound, because that is the craft, and the tears ran down my face and dripped off my chin onto the polished floor, and I let them, because there was no one left to guard her from. That was 9 years ago. The spring after, Alara's daughter was born, and they named her Maelin, and I was standing at the 3rd pillar in the receiving hall on the day of her blessing, a hard-faced man of 50 now, watching the king hold up a baby I had sworn to guard to a woman who was already in the ground. And here is my confession, the true one, the one under the one I have told you so far. Here is the thing I knelt to that portrait to punish myself for every autumn on the date. I broke the promise. Not all at once, not on purpose, but I broke it the way a man breaks a thing by never quite getting round to keeping it, because when the child came, I found I could not go near her. I had sworn to guard her, to stand at her door, to not let her be alone, and instead I asked to be moved. I told the captain I wanted the gate posts again, the outer service, the statue in the square duty that any green boy could do. He was surprised. It was a step down and I was a senior man, but I gave him some reason about my knees and the cold, and he let me go. And for years I stood at the gates in the rain and let other men guard the nursery where Isolde's last grandchild was growing up. Because I could not look at her. That is the shameful heart of it. Every time I saw that little girl in the distance, and she had the gray eyes from the very first, the exact gray eyes, it was uncanny and it was unbearable. Every time I saw her, I saw the woman I had failed to keep alive, and I saw the promise I was too much of a coward to keep, and I turned and I found somewhere else to be. I told myself I was sparing the child a grim old man. I told myself the nursery was better staffed by younger, warmer fellows. I told myself 100 things. The truth was simpler and worse. I had sworn to guard the one soul in that house who most needed a guard, who remembered her grandmother, and I had run from her for 9 years because the sight of her broke my heart. And in the drawer of a writing desk in the locked corridor, behind Isolde's portrait, in a room no one entered, there was a thing she had left for the granddaughter she would never meet, when she's old enough to understand. You'll know when. I had never given it to her. I had never even looked at what it was. 9 years it had sat in that drawer, and every autumn on the date I went to that corridor and knelt to the portrait, and wept for the watch I had abandoned. And then I got up and went back to the gates and did not keep it still. That was the man Maelin found in the quiet gallery on a gray evening in her 9th autumn. Not a stoic guardsman overcome by some noble grief. A coward, kneeling to the face of a woman he had betrayed by inches, on the anniversary of the day he'd let her down, too weak to keep a promise and too weak to forgive himself for it, and too proud, for 9 long years, to let anyone see either. "Tell me," the child said. And so, heaven forgive me, or heaven thank me, I have never worked out which I did. But I did not tell her the whole of it at once. You cannot pour 30 years into a child in the space of a breath, and I would not have known how to begin even if I had wanted to. I told her the only thing I could get past the stone in my throat, which was the true and terrible fact of that particular night. "A long time ago," I said, "before you were born, this house had a queen who was good and clever and very brave, and on this night 9 years ago she died. I was there. And I promised her something before she went, and I have not been able to keep my promise, and every year on this night I come here to be sorry about it. That is why I was crying, Your Highness. It is a grown man's foolishness. You should not have seen it. Please forget it and go back to bed." I had said it. I had trusted a child with a scrap of the thing, which was already more than I had trusted anyone, and I fully expected her to yawn and lose interest, and let me guide her back to her nurse with her small mystery unsolved. She did not yawn. She looked up past my shoulder, into the dark at the end of the corridor, where the candlelight did not reach, and she said, "There's a picture back there. I can see the bottom of the frame." "Your Highness." "Who is it?" she asked. "Is it her, the queen who died?" I could have lied. A better guard than I am, a colder one at any rate, would have lied, would have told her it was nobody, an old lord, a forgotten cousin, would have herded her away from the truth and kept the house's quiet gallery quiet. I have thought about that a great deal since. I have thought that the whole of what came after turned on the single moment when a tired old man, kneeling on cold stone with his defenses already in pieces, decided he could not add one more small betrayal to the pile he was already crushed beneath. "Yes," I said, "it is her. Would you like to see?" She was on her feet before I had finished asking. I took up her too big lamp, because the last thing Isolde's granddaughter needed was to trip in the dark on the way to Isolde's face, and I walked her the length of the quiet gallery, past the shrouded shapes of lesser portraits, to the great one at the end that had hung in shadow for 9 years. And I held the lamp up so the light fell full on the pale gray gown, and the folded hands, and the circlet of silver leaves, and the small private smile the painter had caught by accident. And Maelin, 9 years old, in her nightdress and her worn slippers, stood in front of her grandmother for the first time in her life, and went absolutely still. I have guarded that house for 3 decades, and I have seen a great many faces in a great many lights, and I do not think I have ever seen anything like the look on that child's face in the lamplight. She was not sad. She was not frightened. She was recognizing. That is the only word I have for it. As though some part of her that had no words, some part that had been listening at doors her whole short life for a person who was always described and never present, had finally been handed the thing it had been waiting for. "She has my eyes," Maelin whispered. "No, Your Highness," I said, and my voice did the cracking thing again, and I let it. "You have hers." She reached up. She could not come close to touching the painting, it hangs high, but she reached up toward it anyway, the way a very small person reaches for a thing they love before they have learned that some things are too far up to hold, and she said, in a voice I will hear until the day I die, "Nobody told me she looked like me." And there it was. The whole of my failure, spoken by the one person it had failed, and she did not even know it was a reproach. Nobody told me she looked like me. 9 years. She had grown up in that cold house being told her grandmother was a queen, exactly as Isolde had feared, and it had meant less to her than a story in a book, exactly as Isolde had feared. And no one had told her the one thing that would have made it real, that would have made the woman on the wall a person she could love, which was that when the child looked in the glass she was looking at Isolde's own eyes. And no one had told her because, The one man who had sworn to make sure she was not alone in that house had been standing at the gates in the rain for 9 years, running from her face. I knelt down again, slowly on my bad knees, so that I was level with her. "Your Highness," I said, "Maelin." And I had never once in her life called her by her name, and she turned from the portrait and looked at me with those gray eyes when I did, and I made myself say the rest of it. The promise I could not keep. It was to her, to your grandmother. Before she died, she asked me to do one thing, and it was to watch over you, to stand at your door the way I had stood at hers. To make sure that you, of all her grandchildren, you, the one she knew she would never live to meet, would never grow up feeling alone in this house. And I swore that I would. I swore it on my badge and my name. The child said nothing. She was listening the way children listen when they understand that a thing is important, which is with their whole body. "And I broke it," I said. "I asked to be sent to the gates so that I would not have to be near you. Not because there was anything wrong with you. There has never been anything wrong with you. You are the best thing in this whole house and always have been. But because every time I looked at you I saw her, and it hurt me too much, and I was a coward. So I ran. For 9 years I ran. She asked me to make sure you were not alone, and instead I made sure I was not near you, which is the opposite, and which is the worst thing I have ever done, and which is why I come here every year on this night to kneel and be sorry, because it is the only place in the world where I can tell her I know. That I know what I did. That I am sorry. I had not meant to say all of it. It came out of me the way water comes out of a cracked jar all at once, past mending. And when I had finished, I bowed my head, there on my knees in front of a 9-year-old girl, and I waited for, I do not know what. To be dismissed. To be forgiven, which I had no right to. To simply be left there in the dark with the thing finally said out loud. What she did was reach out and put her small hand flat against my cheek. No one had touched my face in longer than I can tell you. A guardsman's face is not touched, and this small hand, cold from the corridor, laid itself against my wet cheek the way you would gentle a frightened animal, and Maelin said, with the terrible clear-eyed mercy that only a child can manage, "You're here now, though." I could not speak. "You said you ran away because you were near me too much reminded, because being near me reminded you," she said, working it out as she went, patient with the grown-up largeness of it. "But you're here now, and I'm here, so you didn't really run all the way." She frowned, considering, and then her face cleared with a child's abrupt certainty. "I think she'd say, it doesn't count as broken if you come back." I do not believe I have ever, in my whole life, been so completely disarmed. I who had stood watches through thunderstorms. I who had let tears drip off my chin at a queen's deathbed without moving a muscle. I was undone entirely by 9 years old in a cold hand, and it doesn't count as broken if you come back. And I put my own gloved hand up over her small one, and held it against my face and wept properly. At last, the way I had not let myself weep in 30 years. And the child let me, and did not run, and did not call for her nurse, and simply knelt there on the cold stone holding a broken old man's face together with one hand until the worst of it had passed. Then she said practically, "What was the thing?" I wiped my face with my glove. "What thing, Your Highness?" "You said she asked you to do one thing, watch over me, but grown-ups always leave more than one thing." She said it with the weary authority of a person who has had a great deal of experience of grown-ups leaving instructions. Was there something else, a message, or a thing for me? And the cold went through me because there was. Of course there was. I had never told her, I had told her nothing. But the child had reached, with that uncanny gray-eyed accuracy, straight past everything I had confessed and put her finger on the one thing I had not, the drawer. The object, though when she's old enough to understand, that you'll know when that had sat unopened in the dark for 9 years while I hid at the gates. "Yes," I said slowly. "Yes, there was a thing. She left a thing for you, for when you were old enough to understand." Maelin's whole face changed. "Am I old enough now?" I looked at her, 9 years old, in her nightdress, standing in front of her grandmother's portrait at midnight, having just talked a grown guardsman back from the edge of 30 years of grief with a single sentence. And I thought that if she was not old enough to understand, then no one in the whole cold house ever would be. I think, I said, that you might be exactly old enough, but it is very late, and this is the sort of thing that should be done properly in the daylight with your mother and your grandfather the king, not in the middle of the night in a cold corridor with a foolish old man. Will you let me do it properly? Tomorrow. She considered this with enormous seriousness. Then she nodded once, a small regal nod that was so exactly her grandmother's that the breath went out of me, and she said, "Tomorrow, but you have to promise, and this time you have to keep it." "I swear it," I said, "on my badge and my name." "Good," said Maelin, and she picked up her lamp, and she took my hand, took a guardsman's hand in the corridor, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world, and she walked me out of the quiet gallery and back toward the living part of the house, and at the door of the west wing she stopped and looked back once at the dark end of the corridor where her grandmother hung, and she said quietly to the dark, "Good night," as though she had known her all her life. Then she went in to her nurse, who had woken in a panic and was calling her name, and I stood in the doorway and watched Isolde's granddaughter go safely to her bed for the first time in 9 years, with the man who had sworn to guard her actually standing at her door. And I understood that whatever else the morning brought, whatever the house made of me when it all came out, something in me that had been broken for a very long time had, without my leave, begun to set. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the guard room polishing a helm that did not need polishing, and I turned the thing over and over, that I had, in the space of 1 gray hour, told a child the secret grief of my whole life, and that instead of the disaster I had always imagined such a confession would be, it had felt like setting down a stone I had carried so long I had forgot it was not part of my own body. But confessions have a way of not staying where you put them. Because a child who has just met her grandmother and learned she has her eyes, and heard that there is a gift waiting for her, and been promised it will be given tomorrow, that child does not keep a secret. That child does not even try. And I should have known, I did know if I am honest and did it anyway, that by giving Maelin the truth I had also, whether I meant to or not, given it to the whole house. Because the first thing Maelin did the next morning, before her breakfast was even cold, was to march to her grandfather the king and announce, in front of the entire family and half the household, that she had met her grandmother in the night, that she had her grandmother's eyes, that a guardsman named Wren had cried in the corridor and told her everything, and that there was a gift, and it was to be given today, and the king was to come and see. Which is how the private grief of one old guardsman became, before noon, the business of the whole Royal House of Harrowgate, and how everything I had spent 9 years hiding was dragged out into the light of the king's own study, in front of the man I had failed his wife with, whether he yet knew it or not. They sent for me at 11. A page came to the gate. I had gone back to my post at first light, as though the night had changed nothing, because I did not know what else to do with myself. And he said the king desired the presence of guardsman Wren in his study, at once, and I saw in the boy's face that he did not know why, only that it was unusual, and that unusual things at that height of the house were dangerous. I want you to understand what it is to walk that walk. I had served King Alaric for 31 years, and I could count on one hand the number of times he had spoken directly to me, because that is the proper order of things. The king does not converse with the furniture. And now I was to stand before him in his private study and answer. I did not doubt, for the fact that his youngest granddaughter had been found wandering the west wing at midnight in the company of a weeping guard who had been telling her the house's buried griefs. It did not matter that I had not sought her out. It did not matter that I had tried to send her back to bed. A guard is responsible for what happens in his presence always, and a man of my years knew better than anyone that the house does not forgive its servants for being human or the family can see. I marched to the study. I remember every step. I remember thinking, with a strange calm, that after 31 years I would at least be dismissed by the king's own mouth, and not by a captain's note, and that there was a bleak dignity in that, and that when it was done, I would go and clean out the drawer in the quiet gallery, and give the child her grandmother's gift myself, whatever it was, before they turned me out, because I had sworn to keep that one promise if it was the last thing I did. And I meant to keep it, even if keeping it was the thing that finished me. The study was full. That was the first blow. I had steeled myself for the king. I had not steeled myself for the king and Princess Alara, and the Crown Prince Rowan and Princess Adela the king's sister, and standing a little apart, with her hands folded, and her face arranged into an expression of grave concern that did not reach her eyes, the queen consort Morwenna. And Maelin, of course. Maelin, front and center, planted on the hearthrug like a small ambassador, positively vibrating with the importance of what she had set in motion. I stopped at the correct distance and came to attention and fixed my eyes on the middle distance the way you do, and I waited for the axe. "Guardsman Wren," said the king. "Your Majesty." The king is not a large man, but he has a stillness of his own, a different stillness from a guard's. The stillness of a man who has never once in his life had to hurry for anyone. And he sat behind his great desk and looked at me for a long moment with pale eyes gone tired around the edges, and I could not read him at all. "My granddaughter," he said, "has told us an extraordinary story this morning. She says she found you last night in the West Gallery, weeping. She says you told her that you served the late queen, my first wife, that you were with her when she died, and that you made her a promise you have kept for 9 years and also, somehow, failed to keep. She says a great many things, in fact, most of them at once and rather loudly. A flicker at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile. I have sent for you to learn how much of it is true. Here is the moment. I have turned it over 10,000 times. I could have made it small. I could have said the child was overwrought, that a tired old man had been foolish in a corridor, that there was nothing to it, and the king, who did not want a scene any more than any of them did, would very likely have let me go with a caution and buried the whole thing, and my 9-year secret would have gone back into the dark where it had lived so long. I saw that door standing open. I very nearly took it. And then Maelin on the hearthrug turned and looked at me, not anxiously, trustingly. She had brought her whole family to this room on the strength of a thing I had told her in the dark, and she stood there certain, absolutely certain, that I would not now make her a liar in front of them. She had said this time you have to keep it, and I had sworn on my badge and my name, and she was watching to see whether the promise held. "It is all true, Your Majesty," I said. I heard Alara draw breath. I did not look at her. "All of it," said the king. "All of it," I said, and then, because I had already stepped off the cliff, I stepped the rest of the way. "If it please Your Majesty, I will tell it properly, and then you may do with me as you see fit. I have been carrying it a long time. I think it is past time it was set down." The king inclined his head once. "Tell it." So I told it. In that warm study, in front of his whole family, with the fire ticking in the grate and the winter light coming gray through the tall windows, I told the king of the Royal House of Harrowgate the story I have told you, the frightened girl of 19 who crossed the water and stumbled in the receiving hall, the gloved hand under her elbow, the 30 years at her door, the small hours in the gallery when she could not sleep, and the last watch and the promise at her bedside, and the third grandchild she would never meet, and the drawer, and the gift, and the 9 years I had spent at the gates in the rain because I was too much of a coward to look at the child who had her eyes. I did not spare myself. I want that on the record because it is the only thing I did right in the whole of those 9 years. I did not dress it up as noble grief. I told them I had broken my oath. I told them I had run. I told the Crown Prince Rowan and the Princess Alara, to their faces, that I had sworn to their dying mother that their little niece would not be alone in this house, and that I had then made sure I was never near her, and that it was the worst thing I had ever done, and that I had no excuse for it except that I was weak, and that I had come every year to kneel in the dark and be sorry instead of doing the one simple thing that would have made being sorry unnecessary. When I finished, the room was very quiet. And then Princess Alara, the Queen Isolde's own daughter, who was a grown woman with children of her own, who had been a girl of perhaps 14 when her mother died. Princess Alara crossed the study and stood in front of me, and I braced, because I had just told this woman that I had failed her mother's last wish for 9 years, and I could not have blamed her for anything she chose to do. She was crying, but she was smiling through it in a way that made no sense to me at all until she spoke. "You were the one on the path," she said. "Your Highness, when we were small, in the garden, there was always one guardsman on the path when Mother walked, the same one, year after year, and once when I was very little, I fell and skinned both my knees on the gravel, and I remember a guard who was not supposed to move at all going down on one knee to see if I was hurt, and my mother laughing and saying, 'That's Wren, he'll pretend he didn't.' She laughed wetly, the memory clearly rising up whole after decades. That was you, all those years, the man on the path. She used to say, I had forgotten this until this very moment. She used to say there was one man in the whole house she never had to be brave in front of. She never told us his name. She said it wasn't the sort of thing you tell." Alara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so like a child's that for an instant I saw the girl on the gravel path. "It was you. She had one place in this whole cold house where she could put her guard down, and it was standing at her door in a red coat pretending to be a wall. And you kept that secret for her for 30 years, and you have kept it for 9 more since she died, and you think you failed her." I could not answer. "You didn't fail her," said Alara. "You couldn't look at Maelin because looking at Maelin broke your heart. That isn't cowardice, Wren. That's the size of what you carried." And she took my gloved hand in both of hers, the second member of that family in as many days to take a guardsman's hand as though it were nothing, and she pressed it hard and said, "Thank you, for all of it, for every year of it. My mother chose well. I have stood a great many watches. I have been struck by an arrogant man's hand and not moved. I have stood through a queen's death without a sound. I did not have the discipline for this. I felt the tears come and I let them come, in the king's own study, in front of the whole family, and no one thought the less of me for it, or if they did they had the grace not to show it. But not everyone in that room was moved." "This is all very touching," said the Queen Consort Morwenna, "but I feel someone ought to say the obvious thing." The temperature of the room changed. I have learned over the years to feel it when Morwenna is about to move a piece across the board. There is a particular quality to her silences, a stillness that is not a guard's honest stillness, but the stillness of a cat that has seen a bird. She stepped forward now into the center of the warmth and the grief, and she folded her hands, and she looked at me with those cool, assessing eyes, and she said the thing she had clearly decided to say the moment she understood which way the wind in that room was blowing. "A guardsman," she said, "has confessed freely before witnesses to abandoning his sworn post for 9 years. He has admitted he asked to be reassigned specifically to avoid a duty he was given. He has admitted he has, all this time, held some object belonging to the late queen in a private drawer that no one knew about, in a locked room, entirely outside the household inventory." She let that hang. "I am sure his motives were as tender as everyone seems determined to believe. But we are speaking of a man who has kept a hidden thing in a hidden room for 9 years, who has admitted to a pattern of leaving his post, and who has now inserted himself, weeping, in the dark, into the private company of a 9-year-old princess in her nightclothes." She turned her cool gaze on the king. "I only ask, Your Majesty, whether sentiment is quite the ground on which we wish to decide who has access to the children. There are procedures. There is an inventory. Perhaps before we all embrace this man, someone ought to actually open that drawer and see what he has been keeping in it under supervision, and establish precisely what has been going on in a locked room off the nursery corridor for 9 years. For the children's sake." It was masterful. I will give her that even now. She had taken every true and tender thing I had said and turned each one, without a single lie, into the shape of a threat. A promise became a fixation. A grief became a pattern. A gift left by a dying queen became a hidden object of unknown nature, kept in secret near the children, by a man who admitted he sought out excuses to be where he should not be. And she had wrapped the whole poisoned thing in the one phrase no one at that height could argue with, for the children's sake, so that anyone who defended me would seem to be defending it against the children. I saw Ilara's face go white with anger. I saw the crown Prince Rowan's jaw set. But I also saw, because a guard sees the whole room, that the king's tired eyes had gone thoughtful, and that the word inventory had landed, and that Morwenna had found, with an instinct I could only call diabolical, the one crack in the warm story into which a doubt could be driven. Because it was true. There was a hidden object, in a locked room, near the nursery, kept secret for 9 years. Every fact was true. Only the meaning was a lie, and meaning is the easiest thing in the world to bend. The drawer, said the king slowly, does exist then. There is an object. There is, your majesty, I said. My mouth had gone dry. The late queen left it for the Princess Maelin, for when she was old enough to understand. I have never opened it. I do not know what it is. I know only that it is hers and that it was to be given today. You have never opened it, said Morwenna, with the faintest lift of one eyebrow. And yet you know exactly which drawer it is in a locked room you have visited every year. Forgive me if I find that a slender thread on which to hang the house's trust. And there it was, the false dawn turned false, the warm room gone cold, and my one clean promise, the single thing I had meant to keep if it cost me everything, now hanging on whether I could prove that a drawer I had never opened contained what a dead woman had told me it contained, before a woman who had every reason to want me broken finished breaking me. Because if that drawer, when they opened it, held anything that could be twisted, anything at all, Morwenna would twist it, in front of the king, and 9 years of grief would curdle into 9 years of suspicion, and the last thing I could give the child would be taken out of my hands and turned into the proof that I should never have been near her at all. Then we shall open it, said the king, together now all of us. I do not think Morwenna had expected that. I think she had expected the king to order the drawer opened by a chamberlain, in private, under inventory, with me held elsewhere, and the object examined out of my hands and out of the family's sight, which is how such things are ordinarily done, and which would have given her the room she needed to shape whatever was found. But the king rose from his desk, and he was not going to be managed, and he said, "My granddaughter has waited 9 years for a gift from her grandmother. She will not wait an hour more, and she will not receive it from a chamberlain's hands out of an inventory list. We will go to this drawer, all of us, and Wren will open it in front of us all, and we will see what my wife left for the child she never met. And then," he said, and here his tired eyes came to rest on Morwenna for just a moment, "we will decide what it means, together, in the light." So we went, in a strange, solemn procession through the living part of the house and into the shuttered west wing, the king first, then Ilara with Maelin's hand fast in hers, then the crown Prince Rowan, then Princess Adela, who had not said a word but whose sharp old eyes had missed nothing, then Morwenna, and last of all myself, walking to the quiet gallery I had walked to alone every autumn for 9 years, this time with the whole house at my back. They had never seen it. That struck me, following them in. None of them had been down that corridor in years. The younger ones had never been at all. And so they came, one by one, into the long cold gallery with its shrouded portraits and its smell of beeswax and stone. And they saw at the end of it, in the gray windowlight now, instead of a child's stolen lamp, the great portrait of Isolde in her pale gray gown with her folded hands and her private smile. And the whole procession stopped, without anyone deciding to. Rowan made a sound. He was a grown man, the crown prince, the heir to the realm, and he stood in front of his mother's face and made a small broken sound like a much younger person, and I remembered that he had been 16 when she died, old enough to remember everything and young enough for it to have hollowed him out, and that her portraits had hung in shadow ever since, so that no one need be ambushed by that face in a lit corridor. Alara had told me her mother had one place to put her guard down. It came to me, watching her children, that they had spent 9 years with no place at all, that they had dealt with losing her the way this whole cold house dealt with everything, which was to shroud it and lock the door and walk a different way. And here I had been, all along, keeping her one lit lamp burning in the dark alone, and thinking it a private shame. "Oh," said Alara very softly, looking up at her mother. "Oh, there you are." The king stood a long time in front of the portrait of his first wife with his hands clasped behind his back and said nothing at all, and no one hurried him, and even Morwenna had the sense to hold her tongue. Then the king said quietly, "Wren, the drawer." The writing desk stood against the wall beneath the portrait, a small elegant thing that had been hers, moved here when the rooms were closed. I crossed to it. My hands, which do not shake, a guard's hands do not shake, were not entirely steady as I drew the little brass key from where it had hung on my own watch chain for 9 years, because the queen had given it to me at the last, and I had never once trusted it to a drawer or a box, and I fit it to the lock, and I felt the whole house holding its breath behind me, and I turned it. The drawer slid open. Inside there was a bundle wrapped in a square of pale gray silk, tied with a faded ribbon, and on top of it a single folded letter, the paper gone soft and yellow at the edges, with one word written on the outside in a hand I knew as well as my own, a fine, sloping, unmistakable hand that had signed 100 small kindnesses over 30 years. The word was Maelin. She had known the name. That is the thing that stopped my heart, kneeling there at the open drawer. The child had not been born when Isolde died. Alara had been only newly expecting. There was no way on earth the queen could have known whether the coming baby would be a boy or a girl, let alone what it would be called, and yet there, on the letter in her own hand, was the name Maelin, the exact name the child had been given the following spring, written by a woman who had been in her grave for months before the naming. I turned, and I held the letter up so they could all see the word on it, and I watched the same impossibility go through every face in the corridor. "That is her hand," said the king. His voice was not quite steady. "That is Isolde's hand. I would know it anywhere." "But the name—" "She could not have known the name," said Rowan. "Alara hadn't even. We didn't choose Maelin until after she was born. I was there. We argued about it for a week." And it was Princess Adela, the king's sharp-eyed sister, who had said nothing all this while, who spoke now slowly, as one who is remembering something across a great distance. "No," she said, "you didn't argue about it for a week. You argued about it for a week, and then your mother's name for it came out and everyone stopped arguing." She looked at Alara. "You don't remember because you were half out of your mind with a new baby and a dead mother in the same year, God help you, but I remember. Isolde had told me, years before, when Rowan was small, she had told me that if she ever had a granddaughter she would want her called Maelin, after her own grandmother across the water, the one who raised her. She told me it the way you tell a person a wish you know you'll never get to have. And when the baby came and she was a girl and no one could agree, it was I who said it. I said, your mother wanted a Maelin. And the room went quiet, and that was that." Adela's old eyes were wet. "I had forgotten I was the one who said it. I thought it had just arrived. But it came from her. It came from Isolde. She reached forward 9 months past her own death and named her granddaughter through me, and I never even knew I was the one carrying the message." The corridor was utterly silent. "Then she did meet her," said Maelin. We all looked down at the child. She had been standing very still through all of it, holding her mother's hand, her gray eyes going from face to face, following the largeness of what the grown-ups were realizing. And now she said it again, working it out in that clear child's way, the way she had worked out it doesn't count as broken if you come back. "Everyone kept saying she never met me," Maelin said. "Wren said it. He said she asked him to watch the one she'd never meet, but she knew my name before I was born. She picked it. She reached all the way here and picked it. The child looked up at the portrait of the woman with her own gray eyes, and her small face was full of a wonder that had no sadness in it at all. That's not never meeting someone. That's just meeting them early. I have said that this child undid me twice in a single day. That was the second time, and it was worse than the first, or better. I have never been able to decide. That's just meeting them early. Out of the mouth of a 9-year-old, in a cold corridor, in front of a king, the whole grief of the house turned inside out in 8 words. The loss reframed not as an absence, but as a reaching. A hand extended forward across death to touch a person it would never live to see, and closing, at last, on the letter in my glove. "Open it," said the king very low. "Read it. It is hers to have." And Alara knelt down beside her daughter on the cold stone, and the two of them opened the letter together, and Alara read it aloud in a voice that broke and steadied and broke again. The last words of the queen is all to the granddaughter she named across her own death, written in the good gray light of the West Wing rooms in the autumn she was dying, and given at last, 9 years late, by the man who had sworn to give it. "My dear Maelin," the letter began, and Alara had to stop after the 2 words and press the back of her hand to her mouth before she could go on. "My dear Maelin, if you are reading this, then you are old enough, and I am long gone, and a good man has kept his word to me for years, and I hope you will thank him, because it will have cost him more than he will ever tell you. I never met you. That is the strangest thing to write. As I set this down, you are not yet born. You are a hope your mother carries, and the doctors are quite certain I will not last to hold you. I have made my peace with a great deal, but I confess I have not made my peace with that. I would have liked to hold you. I would have liked to be the sort of grandmother who is a real warm person to you and not a face in a cold gallery and a name you are told to be proud of. That is the thing I cannot bear, not the dying, but the thought of you growing up in this great house believing you had a grandmother who is only a story. So let me be more than a story for the length of this one letter. I was frightened when I came to this house. I was 19, and I had crossed the water to marry a man I barely knew, and I was so afraid I could not eat, and on my very first day in front of the whole court, I stumbled, and one guardsman, who was not supposed to move so much as an eyelash, took one step out of his place and caught my arm so I would not fall. He was in terrible trouble for it, or should have been. But he did it anyway because he saw that I was frightened, and he decided that mattered more than the rule. I have thought about that all my life. That a person's kindness is measured not by the rules they keep, but by the one rule they will break at cost to themselves, because a frightened person needed them to. That is what I want to give you, my darling, since I cannot give you myself. I want to give you the knowledge that there is such a thing in the world as a person who will step out of his place for you. Look for them. Be one. The house will be full of people who keep every rule and would not lift a finger, and it will teach you that this is what dignity looks like. Do not believe it. Dignity is the guardsman who breaks his post to catch a frightened girl. Remember that, and you will never mistake coldness for greatness, however grand the coldness dresses itself. The little thing wrapped with this letter was mine and my grandmother's before me, the first Maelin, whose name you carry. It is not worth much. Do not let anyone tell you it is a great jewel of the house, because it is not. It is a small plain thing, and that is exactly why I want you to have it and not the state jewels. Keep it in your pocket. Hold it when you are frightened. And know that it was held by 2 women who loved you before you drew breath, the grandmother who raised me, and me, and that love does not need to have met you to be entirely real. Be brave, but not the cold kind of brave. Be brave the way the guardsman on the path was brave. Your grandmother who met you early in the only way she could. Isolde. Alara could not read the signature aloud. She got as far as the only way she could, and then she simply bowed her head over the letter and wept, and Maelin put her small arms around her mother's neck, and the 2 of them knelt there together on the cold stone under the portrait, and no one in that corridor was untouched by it. Not one. I saw the king's face working, and I saw Rowan turn away to the window with his shoulders shaking, and I saw hard old Adela weeping openly and not caring who saw. And Maelin, still in her mother's arms, reached out and took the little gray silk bundle from the open drawer, and untied the faded ribbon, and let the silk fall open in her small palm. It was a thimble. A small, plain, worn silver thimble, no more than that, the kind an ordinary woman uses to mend an ordinary shirt, dented on one side, the chaste pattern round its rim rubbed nearly smooth by 2 lifetimes of use. Not a jewel, not a crown. A thimble that a grandmother across the water had used to patch her granddaughter's clothes, and that the granddaughter had carried across the sea into a marriage that frightened her, and had kept through 30 years of queenship as her one small, plain, private thing, and had left, at the last, wrapped in gray silk in a locked drawer, for a granddaughter she named through death and never held. Maelin closed her small hand around it, and she looked up at all of us, at the king, at her mother, at the weeping crown prince, and she said, with the enormous simplicity of a child who has understood something the grown-ups are still catching up to, "It's for holding when you're scared," she said, "in your pocket." And she put the little thimble into the pocket of her nightdress, where it made a small dear bump against her side, and she patted it and she was done, and it was the most natural thing in the world. And into that silence, because Morwenna could not help herself, because it is not in her to leave a field she has lost without one last shot across it, the queen consort said, in a voice pitched carefully between reason and concern, "A charming object, and I don't doubt its sentimental value. But I would still gently observe, Your Majesty, that we have now confirmed exactly what I feared. A household servant has held an item belonging to the late queen, outside all inventory in a private drawer, for 9 years on his own authority. However touching his reasons, that is precisely the kind of unaccountable access that the procedures exist to prevent. Sentiment today, something less charming another time, in another servant's drawer. I would be failing in my duty if I did not say that the principal—" "Madam," said the king. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He turned from his first wife's portrait, and he looked at his second wife across the length of that cold corridor, and there was in his tired eyes something I had never once seen there in 31 years of standing at his walls, which was the full and undivided attention of a king who has made up his mind. "For 9 years," said the king, "I could not walk down this corridor. None of us could. We shrouded her portraits and we locked her rooms and we walked the other way, all of us, because it was easier than looking at her face. And in all that time one man came here, alone, every year, on the day she died, and knelt to her and wept for her and kept her one lamp burning in a house that had chosen the dark. And kept at his own cost, telling no one, asking for nothing, the small plain thing she left for the child, safe and dry and whole for 9 years, until the day the child was old enough to have it. His voice did not rise, but it hardened the way stone hardens. You call that unaccountable access, madam. I call it the only accounting in this whole house that came out right. He did not fail her. We failed her. He is the only one of us who never once walked the other way." Morwenna said nothing. There was, for once, nothing to be said. She had staked everything on the drawer holding something that could be twisted, and the drawer had held a thimble and a dying woman's letter about a guardsman who steps out of his place for the frightened, and there is no twisting that. She inclined her head a fraction, a queen's retreat, cold and correct, and she said, "Of course, Your Majesty," and she said nothing further, and I understood that I had, for once and entirely by accident, won a thing I had not even known I was fighting for. The king turned to me then, and I came back to attention, because whatever had just happened, I was still a guardsman in the presence of his king, and there are some things that 31 years do not let you forget, even in the middle of your heart being cracked wide open. "Guardsman Wren," he said, "Your Majesty, you believe you broke your oath to my wife." "I do, Your Majesty," I said, because I would not lie to him even now, even after everything. I swore to stand at the child's door and I stood at the gates instead. "That is broken. whatever kindness anyone finds to dress it in. I have no defense. I only ask that having kept the last of it, having given her the gift, I be allowed to consider that one thread at least made good, before your majesty decides what is to be done with me." The king regarded me for a long moment, and then he did a thing that no king had done to me in 31 years of service. He came out from behind the shelter of his rank and crossed the cold stone floor and stood directly in front of me, close, the way a man stands in front of another man, and he put his hand on my shoulder, on the scarlet, on the epaulette, where no one lays a hand on a guard, and he said quietly, so that it was almost between the two of us, "My wife did not ask you to stand at a door, Wren. She asked you to make sure the child was not alone in this house, and you have just, in a single morning, given that child her grandmother's name, her grandmother's eyes, her grandmother's letter, her grandmother's hand reaching forward across death, and a small plain thing to hold when she is frightened for the whole of the rest of her life. You have given her a grandmother where there was a shrouded painting. You have given this entire family back a woman we had locked in the dark because we were too cowardly to grieve her properly." His grip tightened on my shoulder. "That is not a broken oath. That is the oath kept so completely that it took you 9 years and cost you everything you had, and you were too close to the pain of it to see that the keeping was the whole of what she asked. She did not want you at a door. She wanted you to do exactly what you have done today. You are 9 years late, Wren, but you are not forsworn, you never were." I could not answer him. A guard's discipline is a real thing, and it held my body upright and my eyes forward, but it could do nothing about what was happening behind them, and the king saw it, and he took his hand from my shoulder and stepped back and gave me the dignity of a moment, and then he turned to the corridor at large and became the king again. "This gallery will be opened," he said. "Today, the shrouds come off, the door stays unlocked, the lamps are lit. My granddaughter will walk here whenever she pleases and get to know her grandmother's face, and so will the rest of you, and so will I, God forgive me, because it is 9 years past time." He looked up at the portrait of Isolde in her pale gray gown with her private smile, and something in his own face eased, as though a shroud had come off it too. "And guardsman Wren is relieved of the gate posts, effective at once. He will return to the household service. He will be the guard on the children's corridor, Maelin's especially, for as long as his knees will carry him, and when they will not, he will sit in a chair at the end of it and be there anyway, because that is the post my wife gave him, and I am only, at long last, confirming her orders. And that is nearly the end of it. Nearly, but not quite, because you will want to know how it's settled, in the long, ordinary days after the grand moment passed, as such things must. I am the guard on the children's corridor now. I have been for 3 years. My knees are worse, and the king was as good as his word about the chair. There is one at the end of the passage, a good deep one, and on the bad days I sit in it and I am there anyway, exactly as he said. The quiet gallery is not quiet anymore. It has lamps in it, and the door stands open, and Isolde in her gray gown looks down on a corridor that people actually walk through now, and Maelin walks through it nearly every day, and talks to the portrait as she goes, the ordinary chatter of a girl to her grandmother, and I have long since stopped finding it strange and started finding it the most natural thing in that whole house. Rowan comes sometimes, the crown prince, and stands in front of his mother for a while and says nothing, and goes away lighter than he came. Alara had a copy of the letter made and framed, and keeps it where her children can read it, and I have heard her tell the younger ones the story of the guardsman who stepped out of his place to catch a frightened girl, and I have had to find something to do with my eyes when she does. The thimble lives in Maelin's pocket. She is 12 now and far too old, she would tell you, for such things, but the thimble is always in her pocket, and on the days she has something to be brave about, an examination or a state appearance or the ordinary terrors of being 12 in a great cold house, I see her hand go to it once, a small private press, and then she squares her small shoulders and walks in. She has never once needed to explain to me what she is doing. I know. I have watched 3 generations of that family square their shoulders and walk in. She is the bravest of the lot, and she does not know it, which is what makes her so. As for me, I have made my peace with the thing I could not make my peace with for 9 years. Not because the king told me I was not forsworn, though it helped to hear it from his own mouth. And not because Alara thanked me, though I will carry that to my grave. I made my peace because of a 9-year-old girl in worn slippers who found a broken man weeping in the dark and did not run, and sat down on the cold stone, and said, "Tell me," and then handed me back my own life reframed in 8 plain words a philosopher could not have bettered. It doesn't count as broken if you come back. I came back. It took me 9 years and it cost me every stone I had been carrying, but I came back, and I stood at her door at last, and I am standing at it now. People ask me, the young guards especially, why an old man with ruined knees will not take his pension and go and sit by a warm fire somewhere and be done. They think it is discipline. They think it is the 34 years, the badge, the pride of the craft. I let them think it. It is a good enough answer, and it is even partly true. But the real answer is a small silver thimble in a girl's pocket, and a portrait with the lamps lit, and a promise made to a frightened queen at the foot of a bed a very long time ago, that the last of her grandchildren, the one she would never hold, would not be alone in this house. She is not alone. I have seen to that. It is the one thing in my whole long life I am entirely certain I got right, and I got it right in the end only because a child was kinder to me than I had ever been to myself. She met her grandmother early, and I, who thought for 9 years that I was the man who had failed her, turned out to be, without ever deserving it, the man who was chosen to carry the message home. I stand my post. The lamps are lit. And down the corridor, if you listen, you can sometimes hear a girl telling a portrait about her day, and an old guardsman in the good deep chair, pretending, as he was trained to pretend, that he is only a wall that happens to breathe, and not weeping, and not smiling, and doing, at long last, both at once.